I'm really happy to be presenting this session. This conversation is definitely something that is talked about a lot in our community. I'm so happy to hear from the council and the staff at SAG-AFTRA. And I'm really excited to take my own notes as an alum myself. I really hope you enjoy the information that is going to be presented, and I look forward to the ideas that will spring for it and the work that we'll do together. So without further ado, I am so happy to hand this over to the team at SAG-AFTRA.
Hello, everybody. My name is Janice Pendarvis. I am SAG-AFTRA's National Vice President for Recording Artists and Singers. I chair the National Singers Committee. I'm on the National Board and a million other committees and different things that I do. I am also a longtime professor at Berklee College of Music. I felt that it was really important to try to bring those two sides of my life together in an event like this, because I really feel that for those of us who are in the music business, we need to look at different areas of the business and start interacting with people that maybe we don't ordinarily interact with, because there's a lot of important things that happen in spaces that we don't necessarily inhabit. One of the things that doesn't get talked about enough is the incredible work that SAG-AFTRA does on behalf of music performers. Usually when we hear the name SAG-AFTRA, we're thinking, oh, actors. But we are not just actors by any means. We are actors, we're stunt persons, we are broadcast news people, we're singers, we're dancers, we're recording artists. And SAG-AFTRA has a long history of quietly championing the music legislation that is the legislation that we all want in the music business. So I decided, since I became National Vice President of Recording Artists and Singers, that we weren't going to be so quiet about it anymore. So here we are. I am thrilled to have our General Counsel, Jeffrey Bennett, here with us to give a formal presentation about the nuts and bolts of how this all works. So I'd like to toss to you.
Thank you, Janice, and thank you, Donna. I am not exaggerating at all when I say I'm thrilled to be here. I have given talks to lawyers at law schools and college students about all manner of topics, but I've never had an opportunity to talk specifically about music to music people. And it thrills me to be able to do that. I want to start. I have a PowerPoint presentation for you all. You'll have to forgive me. I am a lawyer at heart, and I love my PowerPoint presentation. So if we could pull that up, I'm going to dive right in and tell you a little bit about myself and a little bit about SAG-AFTRA and the work that we do in music law and music policy. First slide, please. First, a thank you to Mario, who's going to be helping me move these slides along. And then a thank you to all of you, because you are music school alumni. So I already owe you a debt of thanks for being involved in the music industry, whether you are working in the business side of the industry, or whether you are performing music, or whether you are creating music, or whether you're doing all of those things. I applaud you and I thank you. In my opinion, in my humble opinion, nothing brings more joy and happiness to the world than music, and somebody's got to do it. So thank goodness for the people that do. Next slide. Me, why am I here? There's my business card. So that's proof that I am actually the general counsel for SAG-AFTRA. So I am here because I do a lot of work with music law and music policy for SAG-AFTRA. I'm also here because I happen to absolutely love music. It's why I have the job that I do. It's why I have the career that I have. I believe one of the main reasons that I love music so much is because I had an older brother who played the bass guitar. And when we were young and in high school, Our home was sort of the second home for anybody in the neighborhood or anybody at our school that played an instrument and wanted to congregate in one area to try and learn and play the songs that they loved. So I spent years and countless hours sitting on the stairway leading down to my basement, just watching people play the drums and play the guitar and play the bass and sing or try to sing. And I loved every second of it. Of course, I ended up playing some bass myself. I ended up playing some drums myself. I ended up getting the nerve to grab a microphone and I'm not going to say sing, but I'll say front a band. I fronted a band. So I have done all those things, just not very well, not enough to make a career out of doing those things, but certainly enough to absolutely love all of those things. Next slide. SAG-AFTRA, where I am now. And I should say before I ended up at SAG-AFTRA, I worked at the Screen Actors Guild. Before I worked at the Screen Actors Guild, I actually was in the music industry directly, negotiating record deals. Prior to negotiating record deals, I worked in the music department at the William Morris Agency, which is now William Morris Endeavor. I did that right out of law school in the mailroom because I absolutely knew that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to work in the music industry. Why did I end up going from the music department at William Morris to negotiating record deals to working with actors? I will get to that later on in the presentation. But yes, I am now at SAG-AFTRA, and that is the merger of the Screen Actors Guild, which was founded in 1933. Back then, actors were stuck in very, very long contracts with one studio who told them what they could do and what they couldn't do and made them work whatever hours they wanted them to work with no rest periods. And some of these contracts even dictated the private lives of performers. The picture that you see there is Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland, who unfortunately, when they were very young, were very popular, and the studios controlled pretty much every aspect of their lives. Gave them amphetamines in the morning, worked them for 20 hours a day, gave them sleeping pills at night, and then woke them up in the morning again with amphetamines so that they could keep working on new projects. That is a recipe for a union to get involved, in my opinion. That is why the Screen Actors Guild started, to stop these horrific contract practices and to provide some leverage to performers. Next slide. The other half of SAG-AFTRA is the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. That was started in 1937, and it was the American Federation of Radio Artists when they started. In 1951, AFRA, which it was known as, negotiated the first phonograph recording code for singers. So the work with major labels and singers dates all the way back to 1951. And in 1952, there's something called the Television Authority, which represented certain TV performers. And they merged with AFTRA to become what was the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. And luckily for all of us, next slide, in 2012, SAG and AFTRA merged. A big reason for that is because both unions represented television performers in some way, shape, or form, and TV was becoming a little blurry. You had network TV, and you had cable TV, and you had TV that was going on the internet, and who represented what. So the leaders of both unions, including Janice at AFTRA, had the wisdom to get these unions together and to merge them, creating the largest, and in my opinion, most powerful entertainment union in the world, representing, as Janice noted, over 160,000 actors and broadcasters and DJs and singers and dancers and recording artists and stunt performers and everything in between. Next slide. Before we get into music, specifically music law and music policy and legislation, I wanted to point out that SAG-AFTRA, and prior to SAG-AFTRA, AFTRA negotiated what was the Sound Recordings Code, which started in 1951. That sets certain minimums for singers in the work that they do, and it also represents aspects of the lives of recording artists, royalty artists, some of the highlights of what we negotiate with the record labels. And we typically do this every 3 years. As Janice noted, she's on the negotiating committee. So if you have questions specifically about that process and that contract, she will know more than I do. But some of the highlights of what we do when we get at the table and bargain with the major labels: we set the minimum rates. We ensure payments for digital exploitation. That's relatively new. I think that came about within the last 6 to 8 years. We provide conversion payments. So if your song that you recorded as a singer under a AFTRA or SAG-AFTRA contract is used in a commercial or on TV or in a movie, you get what's called a conversion payment. That is a negotiated payment by the union. We have health and retirement plans that you can become eligible for based on earnings. And we have a wonderful phenomenon known as roster artists healthcare coverage, which means if you're an active artist on a major label, you are entitled and eligible for healthcare. If for some reason you don't earn enough money to become eligible, the label will make a payment to make sure that you do, because that is one of the things that we have bargained for. It is unbelievably important, and I think something that all of us need to do a better job of getting out there and making sure people know about. Next slide. Here we go. Okay, let's get to the nitty gritty of what we're here to talk about, which is SAG-AFTRA's work in policy and legislation. The first thing you need to know is it all starts, of course, with copyright. Follow the copyright and you will follow the money. And what you have to know, what you always have to keep in mind, is there are 2 copyrights whenever you hear a song. There's a copyright in the song itself, as expressed by the words and the music written on a piece of paper. What you see there is actually the very first song that was registered with the US Copyright Office in 1831. Song is called Maid of My Love, M-A-I-D, of My Love. Is that clever? Is that creepy? I'll defer to you on that. So the first copyright you have to know is the song. A little bit of history. The song copyright was advocated for by someone named Congressman Ellsworth, who happened to be the son-in-law of a copyright advocate named Noah Webster, who you might know from Webster's Dictionary fame. So that was a very copyright happy family. Next slide. The other copyright when you hear a song in the sound recording itself, which of course there could be many versions, many sound recordings done of one song. That is its own separate copyright. Very important to keep those 2 distinct. The sound recording copyright came about in 1972. And the importance of that date will become very noticeable later as I keep going through this. The 1972 copyright was very limited for a sound recording. It protected against reproductions, but it did not protect against public performances. So songs were protected, fully protected, dating all the way back to the 1800s. Sound recordings finally got some protection in 1972, but it was limited. Next slide. A couple years later, the 1976 Copyright Act comes along, and this is the first big change to copyright law since about 1909. They were going to dust off the old laws and come up with a bunch of new stuff that made more sense for the era that we lived in. So record labels and artists and unions were thinking, great, here's a chance to get full copyright protections for sound recordings, just like songs get, right? Unfortunately, even though sound recordings were included in the list of protectable subject matter, and you can now see the list, and there's like 8 things, and sound recordings is right there. There's a caveat to that. If you look at a separate section of the Copyright Act, that says the right to perform works publicly is limited to those things that you see on the slide. All of them being audiovisual works, other audiovisual works, meaning not sound recordings. So the big question is, why? Why not sound recordings? Why didn't they get public performance rights? Next slide. This is the argument that the people that did not want to see songs, sound recordings of songs, even I get confused, did not want to see them have a public performance right. Radio. Radio is represented in Washington, D.C. by the National Association of Broadcasters. That group, it's a very powerful lobbying group in Washington, D.C., argued back in the 70s that record labels and artists who perform on the songs, on the sound recordings, benefit from the free promotion that radio provides to sound recordings. So radio plays songs, consumers listen to them, and then they go and buy a physical copy of something. I grew up listening to music this is where I date myself, in the 80s, and I did that. I listened to music, usually at night, and then the next day you'd go to the record store and you'd buy something because you're like, I got to have that. I got to own that thing. However, as time has gone on, does that argument still make sense? I think that's a question that is worth asking. And so let's ask it and let's move to the next slide. What happened in the mid-90s that completely changed the face of the music industry for everyone, for record labels and for artists and for people who listen to music? Music became digital, right? You see on the slide there's an MP3 player. I've probably had 8 versions of that thing. Napster came along. Because files were digital and they were so small and compressed, it was so easy to transfer them around on the internet that Napster came along and said, hey, let's let people share music, peer-to-peer sharing, right? File sharing. And that led to, all manner of digital versions of music services, everything that you see today, of course, but even back then they were all sort of coming out and vying for consumer attention. The record labels were in trouble. And if you remember from my Who Am I slide, I mentioned I used to negotiate record deals. I negotiated record deals back in like 1999, 2000, which was right when all of this digitization of music started, which is right when the record labels realized they were in deep trouble. And it's right when they stopped signing so many bands and artists and acts. They used to sign a lot. That was sort of the business model. Let's sign a lot of acts and see who we can make stick. And I benefited from that because I was a young attorney and I knew guys and gals at the record labels and at the management companies that were young and up and coming. And we would help the new artists negotiate record deals. They weren't signing anymore. So the music industry was in trouble and I was in trouble. So we all know what I did. What did the music industry do? Next slide. This is where we start to get involved in public policy work by the union. In 1995, the record labels and the songwriters and the artist advocacy groups and AFTRA got together and came up with what was the Digital Performance Right and Sound Recordings Act. This was what had long been missing for sound recordings, a performance right, but it was limited just to digital transmissions. So it was something. It wasn't the full thing, but it was something. So now you have a performance right in sound recordings for digital transmissions. And I think that was the start of the industry trying to save itself. And that was really the start of the unions getting involved in a big way, advocating at the federal level for the rights of artists. Next slide. The first attempt at addressing the full performance right for sound recordings for SAG-AFTRA was in 2015. That doesn't mean that SAG and AFTRA were involved in attempts prior to that. They were. But the first big attempt for SAG-AFTRA was in 2015 with something called the Fair Play, Fair Pay Act. That would have done three things. It would have done the most important thing, which is create a full performance right. So make sure that artists, sound recording artists on songs that are recorded and played on the radio get paid. Thanks to that 1995 act, sound recording artists do get paid for digital transmissions. They still do not get paid for AM/FM radio. And of course, there is no argument anymore to say that people listen to stuff on AM/FM radio and then go buy something. I have probably purchased every single sound recording that I love, and there are thousands of them, as a vinyl record, as a cassette, as a CD. I probably bought them all as downloads. And now, of course, I have subscription services to everything from Apple to Amazon to Spotify to you name it. So I've probably funded the music industry, kept it afloat myself. But the Fair Play, Fair Pay Act is a way to say we are well past the time where radio should continue to say we don't need to pay, we promote sales. So that's what the Fair Play, Fair Pay Act was all about. The pictures you see are actually taken from our office in New York, the SAG-AFTRA office in New York. We got very high profile recording artists. You see Elvis Costello and Cyndi Lauper and Ronnie Spector. Who you probably can't see as well on the other slide are some legislators who had come to our office. We had Republicans and Democrats. It's a bipartisan issue as far as we're concerned. And it was a wonderful event. Unfortunately, we did not succeed in 2015. So next slide. I should note that in 2017, 2018, a version of Fair Play, Fair Pay was brought forth again. It included another thing in it called the Classics Act. That was a part of the Fair Play, Fair Pay Act. What that said was you have to make sure sound recordings recorded before 1972, right? Remember, sound recordings didn't get protection until 1972, and it was going forward protection. So in 95, when they finally got payments for sound recording artists for digital transmissions, they still left out people that were on sound recordings prior to 1972. So the Classics Act was an attempt to at least fix that. Say, look, all those amazing songs from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s are not getting any payments for any artists that were on them. And yet everyone else after 1972 are getting payments. That's basically what the Classics Act was. So we wanted to see this get done. We knew, SAG-AFTRA knew, that standing on its own, or even as part of Fair Play, Fair Pay, it was probably not going to succeed. The National Association of Broadcasters have too much power, unfortunately. So we found out that songwriters and publishers were very, very interested in bringing forth some legislation to address mechanical royalties in the digital space. All those services that I'd already mentioned, Apple and Amazon and Spotify and Pandora, were having nightmares trying to figure out how to handle mechanical royalties. Songwriters wanted their money. These services actually wanted to pay people. They didn't know how to do it. So they came up with something called the Music Modernization Act. And what we did was got our little piece put into that bigger bill that we knew everybody wanted. Next slide. And this is what it looks like. All of a sudden, all of these music entities that you see on the screen are supporting the Classics Act because it's now a part of the Music Modernization Act. That is strategy. Get your bill that's not that controversial but doesn't generate enough interest, get it into something bigger, something that you know the entire industry has to pass because the whole industry, both sides of the issue, wanted to see something get done. So we actually got this included in the Music Modernization Act. Unfortunately, you may be asking, what about fair play, fair pay? What about a terrestrial rate? Why not get that in this big Music Modernization Act also? Well, here's why. And the best way I can describe it to you is a conversation that my friend Rebecca Damon, who I believe is on the call today on this meeting, and I had with a legislator in Washington, D.C., who was very supportive of the MMA and very supportive of both classics and fair play, fair pay. But what he said to us was, sometimes you have a plane that's not going to get off the ground because it's too heavy, and you have to get rid of some of the baggage to make sure everybody else and their baggage can get where they need to get. What that meant was, and he never said fair play, fair pay, but we knew that's what that meant. It meant we're going to get the MMA, we're going to get classics, we are not going to get the performance right. Not yet, anyway. So, next slide. Just a quick note about the MMA. As I mentioned, it solved the problem of mechanical royalties for songwriters, for people that own the song copyright, not the sound recording copyright, but the song copyright. It also got pre-72 artists paid, as I mentioned, which was a huge, huge win. We have thousands of members that fit in that category of having performed on sound recordings prior to 1972. And we were thrilled that we were finally getting them paid. It also set a fair market rate for all digital transmissions, including cable and satellite, which before the MMA actually were paying a slightly less rate for reasons I won't get into, but now they're all paying the same fair market rate. Next slide. Another quick note about how the money gets paid out, obviously super important. There are two entities that pay recording artists, singers, and musicians. The statutory digital royalties that come from the 1995 Act and that came from the MMA with classics. The law basically says that 50% of the money for these digital transmissions goes to the labels or the copyright owner. 45% of the money goes to the featured artists on the recording, and 5% goes to the singers and the musicians on the recording. Sound Exchange pays out the money to the labels and the featured artists. The AFM and SAG-AFTRA IP fund pays out the 5% to the singers and the musicians. This is all money that has been achieved through legislation, right? So this isn't bargaining at the bargaining table. This isn't individual artists negotiating with record labels. This is federal law that requires payments to artists. And this is where the union has had a very big and loud voice. Next slide. Another note about the MMA. And this is, again, where your union plays a very pivotal role in not only just advocating for stuff, but making sure the language in the bill itself does what it should do. In this case, we knew that we were going to create these payments for pre-72 artists on for digital transmissions, which they had never received before. Leading up to the bill, the RIAA had actually been suing SiriusXM in state courts, saying, we want to go after Sirius because they've been playing this music and it violates state copyright law or similar laws that relate to the protection of sound recordings at the state level. Since there's no federal protection, they thought we'll use state laws. And they actually reached a settlement with SiriusXM for over $200 million for sound recordings and the artists on those sound recordings pre-1972. Well, we knew that, but we weren't sure how that was going to be paid out because that was part of a court settlement. That wasn't part of legislation, which we now know divvies things up 50, 45, 5. That's what the law says. So what we said was, why don't we make sure all the money that you're collecting that we know you haven't paid out yet, why don't we make sure that gets split up the same way, 50%, 45%, 5%. Another huge win. I can only imagine how they would have paid that money out if they had used individual artist contracts to come up with how much money the individual artists might get out of that $200 million. We all know that record deals are not great, royalty provisions not great, and these types of provisions are probably even worse for artists. So this is something that would not have happened had it not been for the unions and the artists advocacy groups really fighting for it. Next slide. Here we go again, I will say. We are now strongly, forcefully advocating for what's called the American Music Fairness Act. It is Fair Play, Fair Pay version 3. It is called the American Music Fairness Act. It has already had a hearing in the House Judiciary Committee. There's bipartisan support for the bill. And if you are interested in hearing a real artist, singer, entrepreneur, and wonderful human being speak about it, you can go to that link on the slide right there. And I think it's about minute 23. She speaks for about 7, 8 minutes about how important it is that we finally create a performance right for sound recordings on AM/FM radio, because there's no other way for artists to get paid. They're not selling CDs and tapes anymore. They have to stay on the road and tour and tour and tour. And even that money is now going to record labels because they sign 360-degree deals. So this is an issue that's long overdue to be rectified. And it's an issue that we have been working on and we will continue to work on in the music legislative space, frankly, until it gets solved. Next slide. That is it from me. That is my presentation.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff.